Hello, my name is George Kobar, and I'm a community advocate for Elastic. And joined by me is Cami and Rob. Cami, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Cami Lewis. I'm also a community advocate for Elastic, focused on security.
And Rob?
Sure. Hey, thanks, George. My name is Rob Waite. I'm a support engineer at Elastic.
Perfect. And Phoebe, do you want to make some introductions to the folks that just joined?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, everybody, my name is Phoebe, and I'm from the community team at Elastic.
Great, thanks, Phoebe. So what I'll do is we'll go ahead and go through a brief introduction of who Elastic is, and if you're not really familiar with our stack, and we'll kind of jump right into the part of our series. I'll make sure I'll within the slides you'll see where we did a part one. It was about an hour and so forth in length, and it's on YouTube. And kind of go through. We won't obviously cover a lot of that on the part one. This is going to be building on some of the things that we did as a part of part one into this cluster that we're creating. And then of course we'll have a part three of the series as well, where we'll go a lot more in depth into like threat analysis and going through some pieces there. So let me go ahead and start to share my screen out here. Just give me 1 second. Looks good. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Again, so, just to, I think Cami, Rob, and myself, we got a chance to introduce ourselves. And one thing that I wanted to talk about is, or what we're really focusing on today is Elastic Security or SIEM. And Elastic is the creators of the open source Elasticsearch, Kibana, Logstash, and Beats, which you may have commonly heard as the ELK stack or the Elastic stack. And this is open source software that allows you to search and analyze data. And essentially Elastic is a search company. And when you think about a search company, you kind of commonly think about maybe a search box looking through a web browser. But search is a lot more than just a search box, obviously. It could be, let's say you're looking through a restaurant, looking for what's closest to me. And of course, who does contactless delivery, or who's open that takes credit cards, and who's close to me and maybe I can walk to this location, right? So Yelp, for example, uses Elasticsearch behind the scenes to provide that data to its application. Or maybe you're looking at some rideshare. Let's say you're using Uber. They use Elasticsearch to connect to their drivers, the folks that are driving, the passengers and drivers, and get that relevant mapping data. So they use Elasticsearch there as well. And of course, a lot of observability companies, not only providing the observability, but also looking through and providing observability for yourself. Elastic provides the logging metrics and application performance data that surrounds that. And one of the other use cases, obviously today, security. Security can also be viewed as a search. You're having all this data that's into Elasticsearch or into your Elastic cluster. And you're getting data from, let's say, from the network, file events, file beats, logs, different audit information. All that data is being brought into Elasticsearch, into Elastic cluster, into the Elasticsearch, and then we can actually visibly look for any type of or abnormalities. So that's kind of one of the things that we'll be talking about today. And really the foundation of the stack is Elasticsearch, Beats, Logstash, and Kibana. And Beats and Logstash is really just the ingest pipeline. So, Beats, what we did in part one was install lightweight data shippers onto these different pieces of our endpoints, for example, like a CentOS machine or a Windows machine. And we're sending those log or event data into Elasticsearch. And Elasticsearch is that distributed analyzing and search engine, right? It's a RESTful search engine. So it's things that you can load your data into Elasticsearch and be able to quickly search for that data. And Kibana on top of that is the visualization layer. So Kibana gives you the ability to visualize and explore that data, and it's specifically looking through the SIEM dashboard, which we'll show you here a little later on in this presentation. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can deploy this technology. One of the things that Rob and I and Cami were kind of talking about was, you were using our Elasticsearch as a service. And one of the reasons why we're doing that is, let's say for the small, medium business out there that don't necessarily want to manage the infrastructure or manage the Elasticsearch stack specifically, this is an option that you can use. You can deploy Elasticsearch, the whole stack that I just showed, onto our service, and then only worry about using and consuming that. But of course, because it's an open source software, it's something that you could deploy locally to, let's say, maybe a home lab or something within your, within your basement, something from an enterprise level, to deploy on x86 architecture, or let's say on virtualization platforms, or maybe as a Docker container on Kubernetes. So there's a lot of ways that you can deploy Elastic or Elasticsearch. So for example, there's other orchestration tools. I know within the last year, we wrote an operator for the Elastic Cloud on Kubernetes. So if you want to deploy multiple clusters or Elasticsearch clusters, you can do so. So that's also an open source project, deploying that onto Kubernetes. And again, one of the things that we really wanted to kind of drive home, this is free and open. This is something because it's open source, and there might be some features that are licensed, but those are free to use. And that's kind of right at the basic licensing level. But with a lot of this open source, it's something that you can install and try out and see what type of data that you're getting. A lot of across different use cases, would it be security or observability, or as a part of your search application? There's a lot of different use cases a lot of people use the open source Elastic Stack for. And one of the things that provides a lot of the data into Elastic is this Elastic Common Schema. So it's a unified way of bringing all of your logs, and we'll go into this a little bit because I think it's important to see when we're creating some of these SIEM rules on how we're creating these rules and these different signals, and seeing that how the placement of documents in Elasticsearch kind of plays a role into that. But the Elastic Common Schema is a unified framework of bringing different log types into Elasticsearch, and without you having to go through and define what type of schema or a type of template that you're going to use within Elasticsearch. So it's a unified way of looking at different objects or different log types, like metrics or log events or audit information or GeoIP spatial information. It's a unified way for getting all that data for us to look across that. So within Kibana to virtualize that or to visualize that data, you'll see that. And also the Elastic Common Schema is open source. It's something that you can help contribute and improve upon. Maybe there's some different type of file or esoteric file standard that you use for your business. Well, you can help the Common Schema team to produce, hey, this is what would be relevant information, what type of fields that would be relevant that comes out of this log message. So Rob did a great job and is continuing building upon the series of the Elastic SIEM blog series. And this is really what I think Rob was geared towards on doing this blog. And we kind of covered this in the first part, was that, for the small, medium business, this is definitely a solution that you can stand up or for your home to use and consume and kind of get some information about your home environment, or for your small, medium business. I mean, right now, given the times that we're in, it's a little difficult to say that, small, medium businesses are looking for a security solution. They're probably looking for other alternatives to keep their business running, and so forth. But if you're looking maybe for some type of security solution that happens to be free and open, this is a great opportunity for you to take a look at this and see if this is something that will be applicable to you. And, it's something that I've been running within my home environment here, just to kind of see, hey, I've got these lightweight data shippers that are on my boys' laptops, and they're getting to the age when they're starting to look for different gaming sites and looking for, hey, I want to build my own computer, but I can kind of see that network traffic coming through and to and from, so I can get an idea of actually what's going on in your environment. It's not necessarily I'm assuming something that's nefarious, but it's always great to have that information for you to look through. And here's the link for the virtual meetup for if you want to look at part 1. And we kind of covered a lot of the blogs that Rob had wrote. It's part 1, part 3, 4, and 5. And this is again, this will be on YouTube as well. So you'll have these links. But the big part of this is if you want to do the TLDR, in the first part, what we did is we stood up the Elastic Stack in our Elastic Cloud offering. There was a 14-day free trial for you to go through, stand up a cluster, and then what you can do is start to send data into the Elastic Stack. So we install lightweight data shippers, those beats. So it was WinLog beat, file beat, audit beat, packet beat. A lot of these lightweight data shippers that grab our network information. We grabbed our logs, audit information specifically to Sysmon for Windows, which WinLogB, and we shipped all this data into Elasticsearch. And then what we did is we started to view the SIEM dashboard and look at that. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that were kind of missing from that, which we hope to implement today, and kind of go through and by the third series, you'll have a fully functional small piece to this that you can use. Now, of course, in the second blog series, what we're going to be doing is we're talking about securing access. And one of the things that will be covered is the part 2 in this blog that Rob had wrote. And I think what's great about this particular blog, when we're getting started, a lot of the things that kind of was swept under the rug in terms of security or allowing access into the cluster. And one of those things that I'm referring to is, when we set up the beats in the part 1 side, it was using the Elastic username. And the Elastic username is a super user. So if you have access to that super user, you can, create indexes, delete data. So we want to make sure that we kind of security harden this cluster to only allow access from our beats modules into the Elastic Stack. And then also, for the different people that are going to be your threat analysis or your security analysis, obviously they have to have the ability to view these dashboards in Kibana, but they might not necessarily have to have access to actually, write to the index or delete from the index. So in today's presentation, we're going to be going partially into securing access into the stack. And then we're also going to be into more of the show and tell, going through more in depth on the SIEM dashboard and getting some information there. So one of the first things that we'll do is create roles. Within the roles, we'll be defining 2 roles. It's setup role and a write-up role. Within this, you can kind of, sorry, it's a little blurry, but within the Kibana dashboard, you'll see a management part where you can go to, and this is where we'll primarily be acting on today. Now, before I kind of go into configuring the actual roles itself, I kind of wanted to ask Rob a few questions. Now, I know, Rob, when you were writing this second blog, what were some of the things that you were thinking about as you were writing this blog? Specifically, what were the user roles and rights that were required for that?
Sure. So some of it was, so like you have mentioned, you have monitor there. So I was using Beats monitoring, or I had turned on monitoring. So in order for Beats to write to that, you have to have the monitoring privilege. For manage ILM and machine learning, some of that was a little bit of troubleshooting for me. I was going through, so FileBeat, for example, has some built-in machine learning jobs it writes to the cluster when you run the setup command. So when you set it up, FileBeat needs those privileges to write them to the cluster. So some of it was a little bit of trial and error, but it was more blanket. Hey, when we set these beats up, these are the cluster privileges we need. I think of it as a least privilege as far as a security principle, if you will. So I was looking at, hey, for ILM, they're going to go be creating an ILM policy for the beat. If someone doesn't use FileBeat, they could just leave out the manage ML portion of it. And so that was kind of my, hey, as we're walking through this, what do we really need versus what do we just want to give beats when we set these up? So that was the biggest piece was, hey, if you're setting up for a small business or home, you're probably not going to update versions a lot. So, maybe it's okay just to use one account for all of it. But if maybe you have deployed to different areas and you know that, hey, I'm going to control versioning, then maybe you want to just put a more restricted account that can only write to those indices versus manage them as well. So that was kind of where that came from. And then obviously you don't want those accounts to have access to the cluster as far as to go in and sign in and view, because if someone grabs the credentials out of the configuration file, then they'll just, they won't get into Kibana or anything either. So that was in some ways separation of duties. And I know that maybe sounds silly, but I'm thinking if we're doing this at a small scale, at a larger scale, that's when it really becomes important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this solution, again, I think this virtual meetup being that it's, very informal and kind of targeting the SMB and also for personal use. That's kind of when we decided, hey, this wod be great just to, to getting started, get your feet wet and really try that out. And we started thinking, okay, well, obviously for the SMB, it's obviously having these creation rules are very important. The solution obviously is also for the enterprise. We have a lot of very large Fortune 500 companies that are using this technology. So again, even if you are doing this for your home, practicing or setting up these different roles will be beneficial when you deploy that obviously within enterprise. One of the things that, reading through the blog, I think it was great kind of talking about different access, what was required and what was needed. And you're right, I think it kind of does play a little role into, playing with the permissions and so forth. So I think that's a good thing for you to do. I know previous versions, most of this was controlled just via the API, something that you can go through the dashboard, either the dev console or let's say Postman, and you can start to create these different roles. But I know in Kibana, and I'll demo this just in a little bit, a lot of this is just now through the UI, through the Kibana UI, and doing that. So then you can start to create these roles, but if you want to get a more detailed look at what these roles are, then we'll definitely take a look at through the API. And then one of the things through the Kibana dashboard, I just want to provide a quick little screenshot. Where you're creating a role, it's going to ask you for what that role type would be. For example, I know one of the things that Rob had specified is that writer role. And that writer role is going to have permissions to the monitor, manage that index lifecycle management. That's the, will allow you to control how much data and what's done with that data on the cluster. One of the things earlier days of Elasticsearch, you set up the cluster and it works great. Then let's say 30 days or 60 days or down the road, you say, hey, my disk is starting to get full. So then you'll have to have a methodology of what am I going to do with that data? Do I want to archive it? Do I want to delete it? Do I want to roll it up? There's a lot of different things. So the index lifecycle management, it's a part of that second day operation piece. It's something for you to look into as well. It's something that's enabled by default and something you can control within the Kibana UI as well. And then after you set up the, what the permissions are, then what type of indices you're going to have access to. So when we created the file beat within the part one or the metric beat or audit beat, it created these indexes automatically. So it's sending data into these different indices. And as the role, we want to make sure they have access to these different indices that we mentioned: metric beat, file beat, log beat, and audit beat. And then we want to have specify what type of permissions or privileges that we want to have as well. So they want to be able to view the index and actually index data, create index and write. Obviously, part of those permissions that we don't want to include is delete. So any of this role as a writer role, that we'll give to, let's say, these beat users or the users that we configure on the beat agent that will ship data into Elasticsearch. We don't want them to give them permissions into deleting the data on the stack itself. And then you can add different specific index level permissions, let's say, or at the index or the doc level. So there's a lot more security controls that you can contribute, at least on the Elasticsearch as a service. That's just one of the things that's included there. Now, the next part of that in the blog is, now that we created the roles, what we're going to do is we're going to create the specific users for that. Rob, do you want to go into that from a high level?
Sure, and I think it might be later on, but yeah, at a high level, we wanted to then have the ability to, one, set up the beats, set up the beats indices with the setup command, and then also the writer role was more specifically, hey, if you just go deploy this somewhere, then that's the account. You have a separate account that only has the beats writer role. The one thing I did want to point out, I know on here it has Kibana user, and when I wrote the blogs in 7.2 and 7.4, Kibana user wasn't deprecated, but in 7.6 it is, and so later on we'll have a new way of creating access for a SIEM user. But the idea was, it might sound complicated at first, but if you scale out, then this separation of privileges becomes more important, if you will. So I don't know if that answers what you're kind of looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it does. And by creating these specific users, basically service accounts, you get a good idea of, specific access into the cluster. So when we look at, for example, the ingest admin or beats admin or beats writer, then we're being very minimal on what type of access they have into the cluster and what they're able to do. And again, what Rob just mentioned about the SIEM user being able to view and action upon some of these SIEMs within the UI, I think is very important. But you may also have, let's say, a Kibana user only, just a read only, if you want to set up like a dashboard. So let's say outside of the NOC, or right outside where, let's say your security analysts are, you might want to have like just a simple dashboard or some type of visualization of what's kind of going on, or looking at the web traffic, something for, higher, your management or higher up, you can kind of get a one-page view and see that. You can create just a user that has just, read permissions over that dashboard. So there's a lot of customizations on what type of users you can have. And then of course, what roles, what access they have. So there's that two type of relationship there. Roles obviously define, what permissions they have, and then the users specifically what, who is participating within that role. And this is very, something I'll demo live. I just had some screenshots just in case I lose internet or whatever reasons there's issues of me connecting to it. But this is, from the Kibana UI under management, this is how you would basically set a new user, right? So password, confirm the password, email address, and what type of roles that person will have permissions into. I don't think it's very, super complicated here, but I think it's very important as a part of the second part to really secure it and get it to a point where if you were an SMB or an enterprise, it's something that you do within your organization. So, one of the things that Rob was just talking about was just this view-only role for SIEM users. Rob, do you want to add any additional information here?
So this one was different from the blog because of the Kibana user role being deprecated, because otherwise it's Kibana admin, and for the SIEM user you don't need that. That's too much access basically. So in here I went in and at the very bottom you see the Kibana privilege. So I basically said, hey, for the default space, this user gets read read privilege to the default space, and then they still get read privileges to the beats, the specific beats indices. And there's different ways you can do that. You can also give them access to monitoring, or you can restrict which of the Kibana apps they have access to. But this is more of a generic, like, hey, they just need these bare bones indices privileges, and then this very minimal Kibana privilege. So that's different from what's in the blogs, but that was a change in 7.6. So this is a way to do that.
Perfect. And then I know one of the things that you wanted to also talk about is in part one, what we did is we enriched some of the data using a specific ingest pipeline that'll specify geospatial data. And one of the things that I think we also wanted to include is, obviously within a different environment, within a home environment, it's very easy to have just one subnet. But with an SMB, obviously there's going to be a lot of different subnets. And so, Rob, I think one of the things that you also wanted to include is what type of configurations you can do to show multiple subnets.
Yeah, so in the last meetup, there were a lot of questions about GeoIP data, and so after looking into this more, I realized that I hadn't included the ability to to add IPs in an array. And so I wanted to kind of go through, hey, if you have multiple networks in the same location, you don't have to have a separate add fields processor for for 3 subnets in the same location. You can put them in an array like this. And I believe multicast and unicast were also options in the defined processors, and that's in the documentation. But again, this was more of, hey, if you do have multiple networks, but you still want to capture all that in your beats processor, here's a way to do it. And then if you have another office or a family member in another place, like in the blogs, that's just in a separate entry, then you put that specific GeoIP location data there as well. So, and I think your next slide basically is destination, and it's the same information, but it's destination instead of source. And again, it also supports an array, and it supports CIDR, as I have the 10.20.30.0/24. So again, just an option for you. Instead of having to have these large configuration files, you can group them together in this way in your add fields processor.
Yeah, and I think that's important to, a lot of people that I've spoken to within the security community, obviously one of the first things that they have done with their own private or their own home network, obviously is change, the default subnet, right? So it's not that default 192.168.1.1 with their environment. Or maybe they have, for example, most of my, Windows or CentOS machines that I have sending data into Elastic Cloud just happens to be sitting on a virtualized environment on a Dell R710, but I want to make sure that kind of traffic is separate, right? So I have defined my own subnet that I can pick up. So this was a great help for me, specifically just for my home lab, just to be able to add that rather than having a longer configuration file, just as you said. So.
And a lot of it's about data quality. I mean, there's so in the past, I've worked with customers who, if they could put multicast and unicast, for example, if they could put them on a map in a place that would kind of question why is there data there, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something like that, they can use a beats processor to do that. For example, that could be its own entry, and what that would do then, if you look at a map, then you can say, hey, okay, we thought we had these disabled in our environment. Why is this happening, right? And yeah, they could look in the logs, but it's a really nice indicator if you look on a map and see it on there, and it's based on the data quality you put in. So it's kind of unfortunately garbage in, garbage out. If your data quality is not good, then you don't have a lot of good information to look at. And again, if you're a visual person, leveraging maps in this way is a great way to help you as you're digging through your data.
Yeah, and I think that's important. One of the things that we mentioned last time as well is who wants to go through, let's say, a 7 gig file looking for IP addresses or things that look suspicious, right? I mean, even if it's on your home environment, looking through this data can be very, tiresome, or it's actually impossible to do. So having that visualization really tells a story, and that kind of opens that up. So. I know one thing that you also wanted to include too, Rob, that I don't know if this was specifically within the blog series, but is just troubleshooting the data collection in beats.
Yeah, in each of the blogs for each, so Windows, Linux, and Mac, I did have a logging session, or a logging section, excuse me. But the biggest thing is while you're going through this, if beats doesn't start or if it isn't shipping to the cluster, it can be very frustrating. So I wanted to have an example of, hey, when you're logging, here's a way to, kind of look at the logs. You can kind of see what beats tells you. And sometimes that information is helpful without debug, and sometimes you need debug to look through. And if you don't have I know there's folks that the devs are on the Discuss forum if you have questions, right? But a lot of it can be intuitive just by reading through the logs. So again, I more wanted to give an example. And in this one, if you don't specify path.home, I commented out path.writable directory. You can customize the name of the file, make sure you set permissions. And then some folks have so much stuff enabled that rotate every bytes. So at every 10 megs by default, that would rotate out in just a matter of minutes. So maybe you want to bump that to 20, or maybe you want to increase keep files or something like that. And then at the very end, the logging.metrics enabled false. So I think it's every 5 or 10 seconds, the beats will write, hey, here's my metrics information, and it just writes it to the log. And it's not that it's bad, but if you're trying to troubleshoot an issue, it's very noisy. So it's just, there's just different ways when you're troubleshooting, hey, why isn't this working? Or why isn't the module working? Or why isn't it starting? Whatever that is, it's just an example for logging. And this example isn't in the blogs either, but it just has a little bit more detail on when you're troubleshooting your data collectors. So.
Yeah, and we'll provide a little bit at the end of this presentation on how to get help. If you have any other questions or anything else that myself, Cami, or Rob can ask, or just the Elastic community, I'll provide that as well at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm just do a quick demo of what Rob was doing with creating a user and a role, just a very high level. And I'm going to jump right into the SIEM app real quick, just to kind of show you the next progression of adding and importing those signals. So give me 1 second here. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into, it's a live demo, so I'm crossing my fingers. Give me 1 second here. Perfect. And can everyone see my Kibana dashboard?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to start kind of from the very beginning here. What I'm doing is this is my, this particular Kibana instance happens to be in our Elastic Cloud. So I'm connecting to this, this happens to be in Google Cloud. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just hit the home so you can kind of see where I'm navigating to create these users and roles real quick. But if I come to the very bottom here, I'm going to go ahead and expand this out. You'll see there's this management tab. If you ever played with maybe older versions of Kibana, you'll definitely see we've kind of filled out a lot of different dashboards, visualizations, different services. You know, we really kind of filled this part out here. And if I come over to management, this is obviously 7.6.2 is not the latest. 7.7 is already out. But I want to still keep it consistent to what the part 1 was, just to keep the same version. So if you are following along and creating this as we're going along, then it's all very consistent. We've come to the very bottom with my bad screenshot of security. This is where we'd actually create our role. So we create roles. One of the things that if you follow along that blog, we'll create, for example, a writer role. And, if we do, obviously the writer role was specifically for allowing the beats to actually write to the index that we're doing. So if we, create the role, for example, oops, I did that. That was a search. So I'll do, let's say, write role. And obviously it's putting a underscore, so there's no spaces there. Then we can talk about different cluster privileges, right? So one of the things that we want to do was manage ILM, for example. What was another one, Rob? It was
manage ML or machine learning.
Yeah, managing machine learning. Yeah, and then so we'll do manage. Oops.
Or manage underscore.
Yeah, ML. There's that one. And again, obviously these are just specific cluster level permissions, and if we want to have more details about that, you can actually jump through the dev tools on the API and list out all the current permissions for that. So
and something you can do while you're going through this, if you haven't set, like if you forgot manage ILM, when you're on the setup command, you should see an error that says, hey, I didn't have the manage ILM cluster privilege. And so that's an indicator, oh, hey, I need to remember to set that up in the cluster for this role. So.
Yeah, and so what Rob, and just to make sure I go a little more in detail on that. So when you are setting up the beat on a specific endpoint, let's say it happens to be a Ubuntu machine, and when you run the file beat, file beat start, not start setup, what it's going to do is it's going to go out to Elasticsearch, attempt to connect to it, and if the user that you specified within the beats YAML file says, hey, that there's no permissions there, then this is where you can come back into Kibana and specify the correct permissions here, that they have that. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And again, this is what type of indexes that have already been created. So we have all this data that's being sent to Elasticsearch, the metric beat, file beat, winlog beat, audit beat. You can specify obviously all, or if you want to specify maybe for this role, I just want to have winlog beat access. That's something you can definitely do. And once you set up a role, obviously you can edit this role. It's not something that's set in stone, which is good for troubleshooting or playing with different roles and making sure they have the right access. And of course, once we're done, we go ahead and just create this role. Oh, the privileges. Sorry. So we want to go ahead and I believe this writer role has to be able to create an index and also index data. And these are some things that we don't want to access, right? The delete index, right? So again, this is just a very high level. I'm not putting all the permissions here just for the sake of time, but I'm going to go ahead and create that role. And now we have that right role. Now, one thing we can also do is, create that user. Very straightforward. The only one that's created is anonymous right now, other than just that super user role, which was Elastic. And if we actually go ahead and create this role, we'll go ahead and create this user. We'll specify, let's say it's Rob, and the password is going to be, just make sure I type something. I actually might have messed that up. Hold on.
Did you create the role already?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. And then let's do Rob, and then email address is just rob@fun. I don't know if that's a real domain. And then this is the roles, obviously, that we provide Rob with. Let's say, again, maybe this is probably not the best example. Like the username would be like the service account that you would create. This would be like the beats_writer, right? This would actually be the proper username for this particular thing. And then, this would be like the writer role. So we'd actually give the beats the writer role. And then there was some other permissions that you'll add within the blog. You can go ahead and do that there as well. So go ahead and create that user. Now that user should have access to be able to, with the permissions that you specified within that role. So again, that was a very high level, very specific, just on how to create users. Securing your Elasticsearch cluster obviously is very important. It's kind of a next step to getting you into to having that fully functional SIEM, SIEM for your business or for home. So that's one of those things that we want to do. So let me go ahead and stop sharing real quick. One thing that I want to transition to was in the SIEM part of this virtual meetup. And if I come back to the slides here, I did create just a quick video that I'll talk over on. And again, I just want to make sure that this video, if I lost connection, we still have something to be able to present. But I'll be able to show this briefly before Cami kind of jumps in as well. And hopefully this isn't too blurry. Let me see if I can maximize this real quick. During the first part, was we set up all the data that's being sent to to Elastic, and then we're looking at the SIEM dashboard. So if you noticed, as I clicked the lower left-hand corner of Kibana, and it pulled across that entire menu page, one of those options was SIEM, of the SIEM dashboard. And we're looking at just the overall view of this. And one of the things that you'll notice here after the first part of this virtual meetup was that there was no signal counts or nothing that was added. So one of the things that we'll do here, just to kind of continue forward here, if we hit view all for our signals here, then we'll notice there's no data display and there's nothing in there. But if I go into manage, I can actually load these pre-built detection rules. And this is something that's automatically provided within the open source SIEM and a lot of these detection rules that you have. Now, one thing I'll pause this for a second here. These are all just the rules that have been added into the SIEM. And how we do this is, I'll go into each of these individual roles so you get an idea. But it has a risk score, severity, when it was last run, what's the response, what type of different tags that you want. And one of the things that we did in the first virtual meetup is we started to assign tags to different assets. For example, if we want to assign a tag to a Windows machine, we could add, we quickly add a tag. So when we're able to search for that, we'd say, I want to look at all Windows machines, or I want to look at all production machines, so there's a lot of things you can, a lot of power in adding those tags onto your file beat or your beat YAML file to kind of provide some enrichment of data. And then of course, if it's activated or not. But one thing we'll do is actually go into one of these rules here specifically. And what's nice about looking at these rules here, it gives us a lot more definitions. What index pattern is that rule going to be applied to? What's the custom query that it's looking for? So one of the things that we talked about was when we look at beats being ingesting data into Elasticsearch, that log message that we're ingesting, what we're doing is we're storing that data as a document, and each message or each part of that log message, whether it be like network information or Windows event information, we break that data, that document up into different fields, and those fields we're able to obviously search on or create searches for that's relevant to a part of our signal or relevant to our detection rule. So for example, we'll have this query that says, the event action, network connection detected, and then the network connected, and a process name, which is msbuild.exe, and not the destination IP of something that's local, right? So that's kind of this definition that that's providing this, what is that query? That's important because I think as you're creating, let's say, your own queries, you can look at what we've already wrote and modify that and change it slightly. So it gives you a good opportunity to create your own, not necessarily from scratch, but look at what some rules that have been done before or prior. And this kind of gives a description. One of the powerful things, and I think maybe Cami will go into a little more, I won't go into too much here, is it gives you MITRE attack information. What is this rule based off of? So we provide you a link to go directly onto that MITRE attack and give you more specific information about what's going on here. Why is this important for us to protect against? These are, it gives you a lot of great information here. And, Cami, if I don't know if you want to chime in now or a little bit later, this is a great opportunity to, to showcase, a lot of information we're getting from MITRE.
Yeah, I'll chime in right after. There's a couple questions. So I think if we go to Q&A after this, and then we'll see where we're at on time. I may have to push my demo to the part 3.
Sure, no problem. So, and one of the things that we'll look at here is, it runs a schedule. It runs every 5 minutes, and we can actually do an additional look back of a minute. And of course, there's this rule hasn't been enabled yet. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just activate it right here. So we can activate that rule just by looking at the specific viewpoint here. But if we come back to the overview or come back to the main page where we'll show all of the rules here. Just give me a second here. Here we go. Let me go and jump back to this video. One thing you can also do is, now we can see that rule has been activated and then last run. If we want to, let's say, the sidebar here on the left-hand side, you can, by selecting all the rules, let's say you want to enable all and then kind of go through and do that. But using the bulk actions, you can actually activate all, deselect. You can, duplicate that or delete selected. So there's a lot of different bulk actions that you can do. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and activate all of them. All those rules, which I think is, very, something that we can start off with playing around. Let's look at that. I'm going to jump ahead just for the sake of time here. One of the things we can do is when we start to create a rule, actually, I'll just go ahead and do this as a quick demo. Perfect. So if I come back over to the Kanban dashboard, I'm going to the main screen here. On the lower left-hand side, you'll bring out the entire menu. I'm going to go ahead and select SIEM. And let's say, from those rules, for example, we wanted to create our own rule. Now, again, we're not seeing any single hands because there's no, nothing that's really going on in the environment, which is good for me. There's no suspicious activity. We do have an environment we'll cover in the 3rd part series of, hey, now we have all this set up. Let's look at some examples of some threat analysis there, what that looks like. But I'm going to go ahead and let's do a view signal. And I'm going to go ahead and manage my detection rules. And you can either import rules or we just can create a new rule, for example. So one of the things here, these are all the index patterns that this rule is going to run against. One of the things that we have is packet beats sending data from the endpoint network information into our Elasticsearch cluster. But let's say I want to do a query that says, I know of a known IP address that happens to be a bad actor, that I know this is a bad IP address. So one thing we can do here is when we create this rule, we'll say that like host.ip address, that's one of the fields that happens to be within the document, within that message that we're getting. So, there is a whole list of different fields that are listed within our document that's being provided across all of these index patterns. So let's say maybe host.os.name. Let's say we want to create this rule for anything with like CentOS in the name, for example. But I want to specify, let's say host.ip address equals, and it's funny because I asked one of my friends to try and log in remotely to my CentOS machine here. Let me just move this. And I know this IP address, let's just pretend, happens to be a bad actor. So I'm going to specify this IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. And then about the rule, we'll call this rule. We'll just say, bad IP and known IP address is, malicious. And let's say that the severity, let's say, is critical. Obviously, we want to make sure we're alerted anytime this person, attempts to connect to us. This is a very narrow rule detection. I'm just providing an example on how you can create your own. We're going to go ahead and continue. Actually, one quick thing to show the advanced settings. We can specify how often it runs. This is where we can provide that minor URL or supporting evidence on why this IP address is bad. Maybe there's case information. Let's say you're using Salesforce or Zendesk or some other case management. You can put some of that reference URL, some documentation behind that, and add some tactic information about that. Some documentation behind your rules is very helpful. So we'll hit continue, and then this is a schedule on where it's to run. And here's the default. So we'll do it every 5 minutes and additional look back of 1 minute. And we'll go ahead and create it. And bad IP was created. And so, but anyway, we can actually look through all the rules that we've created and specified on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing here. And this might be a good time to if there's any questions or anything else.
We do have another question. Is there an option to have real time, or do you have to wait a certain interval? And that question's from Arson, and I'm not sure if that's. Yep. Do you know what that's referencing?
Absolutely. So
okay.
Elasticsearch is a fast search engine, and we say we say it's near real time. Because obviously from the time in which it takes you to ingest that, from when the event happens to the data that's ingested into Elasticsearch, and then for you to visibly use it or see it is that delay in time. So there's a lot of different configurations you can do specifically in Elasticsearch to show that information as soon as it's available, which is called the refresh interval rate. And that's something that you can specify that's near real time. Now, if you're ingesting a lot of data, sometimes it's beneficial for you to extend that refresh interval rate. Let's say you're ingesting a lot of data and you want to fill up your memory buffer with a lot of log information before you commit that to disk. That's kind of some way to improve index ingestion. So you might want to say, let's say your refresh interval to Rob, sorry to put you on the spot. Do you know what the higher index refresh interval rate
normally
is?
We don't go above 30 seconds for refresh interval, but since I think it's 1 by default, so normally I'll tell customers to start like 5 or 10, but if it's still not helping, then bump to 30. But I normally don't recommend going above 30.
Yeah.
So basically,
Arson, he followed up, said referring to the scheduled alert. Did you catch that?
Oh yeah, no, and I was going to tie that into that, Phoebe. Okay. So basically, the refresh interval would be 30 seconds into that. Now, let's say you wanted to. So the SIEM detection rules, absolutely, you can specify as up to the 1 second. So some of that back information was about how fast the data is presented into Elasticsearch that you can search on it. And that's what we're doing within SIEM. Basically, it's a Elasticsearch search query that we're getting that data through. So understanding, hey, that data may take some latency to get into it. Let's say, 2 seconds into the cluster, and then with your refresh interval, you're refreshing as quickly as you can. Let's say it's a second. Then yeah, you can run that rule, and knowing that you can run that rule as quickly as you want, up to it. Let's actually, I can probably verify this real quick on what that, how fast we can run that rule. Let's see here. Let's do, unless offhand. Yeah, so you can have that run, let's say, every 1 second. Or actually it allows you to do every 0 seconds. So it'll constantly be on, and you can additional loopback, which is optional. You don't have to have. You can specify that. But the time, actually, let me just show this so you can see this, and hopefully this does answer this question. I just, I'm starting to create this rule ASDF, and the description is ASDF, and then I just quickly did this. But the schedule rule, you can run every 0 seconds, or if you want to do every 1 second. right? Or every minute or hour, and then your loop back, which is optional. So yes, to answer your question a long way, yeah, you can have that near real time. And again, near real time is just as quickly as possible as the data is in, and then we can search in Elasticsearch.
Just don't forget the resource cost is the more frequently you have this run. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rob. And I think what is referred there is obviously, as the data is being ingested as quickly as possible. And if you run all of your rules, all in your rules second, you just have to think about maybe the cluster might have to be larger to be able to and it depends on how much data that you have, right? And how much data you're searching across. So it's all about resource utilization and optimization there. So absolutely. Cami, was there other questions that were coming up?
Let's see here.
And it gets the third part of this is really getting into using the SIEM and understanding that, right? And it's funny because nothing in an environment that's going wrong is very demo worthy. So we'll show you an environment that has a lot of different things going on within it. And maybe, like I said, I'll try to do something within my environment that kind of looks, that looks a little weird, that we can kind of showcase. So, that'll be for the third part. Great. Well, I think if there's no more questions, Rob or Cami, do you have any other, things that you wanted to add?
I don't think so. And I don't see any other questions in the chat right now.
And Rob?
The only thing I'd add, just make sure that, when you're configuring all this, just keep in mind what you're configuring your data to be sent to the cluster, right? And like I mentioned earlier, it's if you take the time to think about what data sources you're sending that in, that's what you're going to get out of it, right? So just, and we're here to help if you have questions, even on the Discuss forums and things like that too. So that's it.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. There's a lot of places where to get help. So, well, perfect. I hopefully everyone thought this was a great follow-up to the first part, and I'm really looking forward to doing the third part, just because we really get more into the SIEM part as well. And again, I think we've scheduled that out, so mark your calendars for that. And if somehow you can't make it, we'll be sure to release the video as soon as we can. And who knows, maybe we might be able to do some additional, if there's interest here, additional parts beyond the part 3. So again, thanks for showing up, and everyone stay safe, and we'll see you next time.